like to kick off, and I'd like to say a big thank you to the Keep Rookwood Green Alliance for putting on this presentation today, specifically for the golfers. We are the forgotten breed in all of this, because whilst the council have been holding behind closed doors consultations with the neighbourhood councils and with various focus groups, at no stage have they ever consulted with the golfers. And I think hopefully this presentation, it will help bring you all up to speed with what is proposed, but I think more importantly, what is being done to counter it now and also in the future. I think, like probably most of you, I've been aware of the Keep Rookwood Green Alliance for a while, and I've actually followed their activities from a distance. And however, it's only recently that I've become more actively involved, and in the process, I've discovered, you know, some of the important work that they've been doing. I think it's true to say, and they won't mind me saying this, but whilst the Alliance you know, have a diverse range of specialist skills, as Sally has just outlined, they're not golfers. And the initial focus was very much on retaining Rookwood as a green space. However, as things have evolved, there's been a general recognition that the only guaranteed way of preserving this valuable asset is to retain it as a golf course. And we're very much singing, I think, from the same hymn sheet in that respect. Now, the council are desperate to get their hands on it. More for the money, I think, than for anything else. But of course, I think, as you all realise, once it's gone, it's gone. And not only will we lose the golf course, but also the residents will lose any say over its future development. Now, there's been a very carefully orchestrated PR campaign from the likes of Councillor Chown. You probably read his pieces in the West Sussex. And some of you may have reached the conclusion that this is all a lost cause. Well, believe you me, it's not. And there are many, many hurdles for the council to overcome, and we need to fight them at every step of the way. But we very much need your help and your support in doing this. So, fellow golfers, you know, this is our call to arms. Can I have the next slide, please? I'll just give you a second or two to digest it. But as part of their agenda for closing the golf course, the council have been putting out a totally misleading scenario that not only is golf in decline, but it also costs them money. And as many of you who have tried to book tee times recently will know, Rookwood has never been busier. And unlike the majority of the council's leisure portfolio, it makes a decent return. You can see here that the bookings, you know, last year were up by about 20%. And over the last 4 years, it's returned something like £180,000 to the council. And these figures we have extracted from official council documents. Now, the NPPF, this is the final little circle on the right-hand side, or the National Planning Policy Forum, to give it its full title. This sets out the government's planning policies, and under section 97, it provides protection for sporting facilities which should not be built on unless it can be demonstrated they are surplus to requirements. Now, this was successfully used mainly by Paul, who will be speaking later, in conjunction with Sports England to rescue the Broadbridge Heath Leisure Centre, which the council wanted to demolish and sell to Tesco. And it's something which we believe will come into play in relation to Rookwood as and when necessary. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. I hope you've all signed the petition and also completed the survey, which you'll find on the Keep Rookwood Green website. If you haven't, please do so now or after this presentation, but make it clear that you want Rookwood to remain as a golf course. It's very important, I think, also to remember that this petition, which was signed by over 10,000 people so far, is very specific in that it clearly states that the signatories want Rookwood to remain as a golf course. That is, the specific message from this petition. And the survey, I think, has also, which has also attracted something like 1,250 responses so far, and some of those responses are included in this slide. And I think I'll just give you again a minute to read some of these, some of this feedback before I hand over my little session to Peter Simpson, who is then going to talk you through the next few slides. So thank you very much.
Right, hello, hopefully you can all hear me now. Good evening, I'm Peter Simpson. I'm a member of the Friends of Warnham Nature Reserve, and I'd also like to add my warm welcome to all of you who've joined us on the call today. So, Horsham's large green space. HDC Deputy Leader Jonathan Chown is very clear that major housing development should be in the north of the district because, in his words, this is where the necessary infrastructure is located and the villages to the south simply can't support development. When Horsham District Council presented several local plan scenarios to councillors for their feedback, you won't be surprised to know that Rookwood appeared in every single scenario. So that there's councillors simply were not presented with an option that said don't build on Rookwood. North Horsham, Broadbridge Heath, Southwater, Faygate, all of these are targeted for development in the local plan, and it simply isn't right that all of these major developments are concentrated in the north of the district. Publicly accessible large green spaces are special, and Horsham Town residents are very fortunate in having several within the bounds of the town. As you can see on the slide, Rookwood provides a third of this large green space, and urbanising it will deny residents its health and welfare benefits forever. Last week, the Dasgupta report on the economics of biodiversity was published. It was commissioned by the UK government specifically to address environmental issues that are often neglected in planning assessments. And it's also very strongly advocated by Sir David Attenborough. The report talks about how we don't value the environment properly when we make planning decisions. The report itself says, nature is a blind spot in economics that we ignore at our peril. And Councillor Chowan calls Rookwood an underperforming asset, whereas Dasgupta would undoubtedly see it as an irreplaceable natural asset which should be protected. We intend to make a lot of more use of the Dasgupta report when we've digested it more fully. One of the other claims of HDC is that Rookwood is simply not, there is no wildlife on Rookwood. We think that the green space in the north and the fragmented green space in the south will be much less valuable to wildlife than Horsham District Council makes out. They conveniently forget that they need to make workspace provisions, so some employment is going to have to be fitted in somewhere on this site. It's required by their own planning regulations. They will need to provide secondary emergency service access. They've currently taken that out of the plan because it was an inconvenient truth, but undoubtedly it will creep back in later on once they've got this into the local plan. And the other thing that they will not recognise is that small broken up pieces of green space are less valuable than a single large green space which has established trees and hedge lines. Sorry, let's go. I'm sure that all of you who have been on Rookwood will have happy memories of wildlife that you've seen on Rookwood. You know that this fake news that HDC put out is simply untrue. The golf course and the wildlife are well managed and respected by the greenkeepers and the golfers. And one of the planks of the HDC's argument is that there are no biological records for Rookwood, which is true, but it's not because there is no wildlife there, but simply because nobody had recorded it. So, primed by our BioBlitz event last August, we now have over 420 species identified on Rookwood, and this is increasing all the time. Brown hairstreak and speckled wood butterflies, green woodpeckers, reed warblers, blackcaps, bank voles, roe deer and lizard, dragonflies, insects and moths. The list is growing weekly, and it simply isn't true to depict Rookwood as an ecological desert. It's actually a vibrant ecosystem in its own right. And we mustn't forget that this ecosystem coexists with the Warnham Nature Reserve. It is an essential support for the reserve. The two parts exist together. The golf course and the reserve are a mature single ecosystem, really, and developing it, changing it all around, reducing the size of the Rookwood Lake is only going to damage it from an ecological perspective. So, Rookwood is a public asset, yes. How did the golf course come to be? HDC purchased the nature reserve and golf course land from the Lucas Trust in 1986 when the A24 dual carriageway was constructed. It was purchased because the dual carriageway cut off this land from the remaining parts of the Lucas estate and rendered it less useful, and that they were less able to manage it. In 1991, HDC decided that the land needed to make a financial return. So they sold part of it, which is what that land was used to create the Rookwood Park development by Berkeley Homes. And the income from the sale of that land was used to fund the creation of the golf course. And that golf course was intended, and does, generate income for Horsham District Council through rates and rent, in perpetuity. The remaining land was designated as the nature reserve, and they added an entrance fees onto the nature reserve in order to create a regular income for HDC. So you can see that this concept of land having to pay its way within the Horsham District Council portfolio is a common theme that stretches back over several decades. As you can see in the commemoration stone picture on the slide, all of the golf course and the nature reserve land were intended for public benefit. And clearly, selling it all off does benefit a few individuals, but it doesn't benefit the community as a whole. And so therefore, we feel that they are not living the values for which the land was originally intended. So selling it off, it does generate short-term cash benefit. That money from the sale of the Rookwood Park land undoubtedly funded the creation of the golf course. But it does this, if we sell off another great tranche of land, it does that, it generates that income at the expense of long-term social and environmental benefits to residents. This green space will keep on paying back for generations of people, whereas the money that is generated by the sale of the land will be used, and then it will not be there anymore, and they'll be looking for other ways of getting the money. So the next slide just is a little bit of information about the legal side of the agreement, of that 1986 purchase agreement. There are in fact two different covenants that apply to the Rookwood land. There's one covenant that applies to the north of the land, north of the Warnham Road, and there's a different one that applies to the south. Essentially, the north needs to remain green unless the Lucas Trust agrees otherwise, whereas the south can be developed as long as half of the money of any increase in land value is paid to the Lucas Trust. We estimate that the amount that Horsham District Council will give to the Lucas Trust in order to develop the land now is about £20 million. That's £20 million that will be lost to residents. And again, we are struggling to understand quite how Horsham District Council can justify giving away this substantial amount of money. And undoubtedly Paul will be coming onto this point later on. So now I'd like to introduce Paul Kornicki, who has looked at whether Horsham District Council have properly assessed whether Rookwood is financially responsible and whether it is deliverable as a site. Paul.
Thank you, Peter. So the first slide is headed, is Rookwood deliverable? And what that really means is it deliverable as a proper site for the local plan? So the first few boxes there you'll be quite familiar with. Rookwood is the only public pay and play course in Horsham District. There's been lots of golf courses in the surrounding area which have been lost to development, etc. And there's growing demand for golf, and that arises really from two aspects. One is increased interest in the sport, but also, of course, we've got huge population increase, both that we've already had and have got to come. And the final point there is this MPPF 97, which is very important. I just want to dwell on that a little bit, in that what it is, it's planning law, national planning law, that basically protects sports and recreation facilities and stops them being inadvertently developed. And the really important thing there is the key issue is there a sporting need for that facility? If there is a sporting need for that facility, and this doesn't mean that Horsham District Council are not making enough money from it, that's irrelevant. If there is a sporting need for it, then we would expect Sport England to put a holding objection in to any planning application that came forward until such time as they are satisfied one way or the other. So we're desperately awaiting Horsham's evidence, and they will produce some evidence. It'll probably be fairly bogus if they're true to their colours, but it's surplus to requirement. And then we'll have to hit the ground running and try and challenge that evidence. And we already have someone working on that in your group. So could we have the next slide, please? Feel a bit like Chris Whitty actually calling for the next slide. So what about the finances? Well, it's already been mentioned that the golf course was, it cost around £2 million to set it up, but all that money came out of the proceeds of the Rookwood Park Berkeley Homes development. So when you see councillors claiming that it's never paid the money back, there's absolutely no money to pay back at all, because it was all done out of that development. So it owes nothing to anyone. And it's already been mentioned that if Horsham sells off now, they have to give 50% of the sale proceeds away, which we estimate, and in fact it's confirmed by Horsham's own figures, at around the £20 million mark. And you'll be aware from the local paper, we've been challenging the fact that in 2066, that requirement drops away. And so there's clearly a question mark that selling off the family silver now, when you've got to give 50% away, even if you're not interested in golf and you're not interested in green space and all those things, that sounds like a pretty poor decision, because the council, unlike probably all of us, well, most of us here tonight, I should say, 40, 45 years is a long time away. But for a council, that's not at all. That's relatively medium term. So they should be taking that into account. And the final circle there, the black one, again, a lot of myths put around that the golf course is a drain on council tax funds and so on and so forth. That is a complete nonsense. It turns in around about 50,000 in a normal year for Horsham. And frankly, it could do a lot more, I'm sure, if Horsham took an interest in it and worked with the operator to invest in it and add more facilities. So at future time, as it says at the bottom, Horsham can retain the valley. So what is the rush to get this thing into the local plan? Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, this slide really is aimed predominantly at councillors, and it's really to show that in the local plan they really do have a choice, although they're not currently being given a choice, to leave Rookwood out. So the figures there are based on, I don't know if you recall, the local plan consultation that was done in the early part of last year put out 3 scenarios for Horsham to have to build either 1,100 houses a year, 1,200 or 1,400 per year. And so those are the 3 scenarios: the minimum, the mid and the max. And what this just shows that when you look at those numbers and all the potential sites that are around there, 30-odd thousand houses could be built across the sites that have been put forward. Rookwood's contribution of 750 is a complete pinprick, and it could easily be left out, and Horsham can meet its housing targets. It does not need Rookwood to come up with a good local plan. So the Horsham councillors do have a choice, and frankly, if Horsham District Council wasn't the landowner, in other words, it wasn't going to benefit from a financial windfall if the land was developed, it would not be in the local plan. So that's my bit finished. I'm going to return now to Sally to wrap up the presentation.
Thank you, Paul. So I've got a couple of summary slides here, and what we're really saying to councillors is that Rookwood should not be developed for all the reasons that we've presented tonight. But I think one of the things to really point to is it benefits not just golfers, but all the town's residents. And you know that as golfers, when you're playing golf, you will see people walking past, you'll see people cycling across Fairway 15, you'll see people who are nature enthusiasts enjoying that area. So it's not just the well-being of golfers that's at stake here, it's everyone in the town. And I think that links to the next point, which is if this green space went, given the growing population in Horsham, it would have a terrible impact on our other green spaces. So as chair of Friends of Horsham Park, I know how crowded Horsham Park already is. If all the people who currently enjoy Rookwood started to come to the park, it would be much more of a mud bath than it is today. So we need space for everyone and our growing population and the future. As we've also argued tonight, it's not an underperforming asset, as Councillor Churn describes it. It is one that's hugely valuable for nature and for our well-being. And frankly, we are a well-off town. We have big reserves, and there's absolutely no need to sell the family silver, as Paul's been describing it, or give away that money. And although housing is absolutely important and affordable housing is important, this is only a tiny part of the solution. So we're saying to Horsham District Council, get informed. You do have a choice, and that get informed point is really important, because a lot of the PR around this has been based on untruths, misleading information, misunderstanding of the place. It's all been done in secret, as you know, and you particularly haven't been consulted by anyone. So all of this has led to people getting away with making sweeping statements about how it's a drain on finances and so on, and it's underused, and you see empty car parks. All of that is not true. It's also not consistent with their policies for green infrastructure, for Wilder Horsham District, for sport and recreation, for well-being, even their corporate plan. It's not consistent with that. So we really want to be pushing that with councillors to live up to the policies that they've signed up to. But more than anything, they are not in touch with Horsham residents. That lack of consultation with golfers is, I think, a key example, but they just don't realise how angry it has made the town. So can I have the next slide, please, Peter? So we think there is everything to fight for. And at this stage, which is quite a critical stage in the campaign, we've got to keep making our voices heard so that they recognise how upset golfers are, how upset residents are, how we really do not want this for Horsham, because it's not good for nature, it's not good for well-being, it's not good for our generation, and it's certainly not good for the prosperity of the future town and populations. So what we want to move on to is a discussion with you about how you can help fight this campaign, which we think has a good chance of succeeding if we keep overcoming the obstacles they keep throwing in our way. So I'll just stop the recording.